we have record highs in stocks, if you zoom out, and we also have record highs in metals like copper and gold, albeit the flows into gold ETFs have not been as strong as you might think, as Eric was just showing us. What does that tell you? What's going on here?
There's so much going on. And just let's touch on gold initially, right? Because what made gold prices go higher? It really was emerging market central bank buying, right? It wasn't ETFs, right? Because the ETF buyer usually looks for the Fed easing, right? And now we know that's delayed. And also, some of it is the safe haven, right, for those investors. But it was very different. For the emerging market central banks, it was de-dollarization, plain and simple, right? And there were, led by China, but a lot of other markets like Poland, Turkey, Singapore, Qatar. There were a lot of other countries that looking to de-dollarize, right? So that, but we kept getting the question, where are the ETF flows? And remember, we saw outflows, Eric. You were pointing that out weeks ago. Outflows instead of inflows. And so, and it was plain and simple profit taking. I was actually in Europe last week, and I was in Zurich, and some of the funds, they asked me that question, why were ETF people selling? And I said, I think it was profit taking. And he's like, good answer. It was a trick question because they were one of the ones selling, right? And so they said they'd owned these gold ETFs for decades, right? And they're like, okay, at 2,400, it's a sell. But the other story I think is really cool is copper. So again, it is one of my pet favorites because we've been talking about it for the energy transition for so long. But now I think that we're shifting to that AI story, these data centers that need so much power, right? And this whole electrification that's going on and these grids needing more copper wiring, plain and simple.
So let's say somebody is listening to this and they're like, I'm sold on the copper story. How do you actually invest in copper, right? Do you buy the futures or copper stocks? In your big ETF, which is PDBC, which basically bundles together a lot of commodity futures, it's so overweight energy and oil. Copper is what, 7%? So do you still go broad, or do you want to hone in and just buy a copper ETF or ETN?
So now, even though we're all institutional investors very often that come to your show, we're also retail investors personally, right? And so I think we have a product, DBB, Delta Bravo Bravo, that's equally weight copper, aluminum, and zinc. And yes, I like it. I like it for a lot of reasons. But you're right, the problem with us as retail investors is we chase things, right? And so if there's nothing anyone remembers but what I say is that don't chase it, and that's why I do like broad-based commodities like a PDBC, because you get everything. Remember those Prego commercials, it's in there? And so it's the same thing with PDBC. It's broad-based, right? You're getting coverage for all the different commodities. And that's one of my other big themes is this is a year of uncertainty with all the elections and the crazy weather and the geopolitics and some of the macro, like central banks easing, not easing, whatever's going on. And I feel like when we feel that there's so much uncertainty, what do you look to invest? And the answer is commodities. And that's why I know it's hard for retail investors because they want to chase, right? The geopolitics pushing oil up or gold. But if you can just give that 5% allocation to commodities and get broad-based and sometimes target things but generally do not chase commodities. They are volatile. Usually the commodity will come to you. So again, in Europe last week, talking about industrial metals, everyone said, literally, I think they were on their phones buying it as I was speaking. And so I said, no, wait, right? 1,100 LME copper is pretty high. I think we need to wait.